Good evening and welcome back to PJTN Online. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and I want to welcome you here this evening. If this is your first time joining us, we welcome you here and we're looking forward to having a great discussion. I want to encourage you also, for those of you who are tuning in and have been watching this program for the last 7 weeks, I believe we're on 7 now. I just want to remind you all that if you have questions or comments throughout the program, please send us your questions or feedback or comments if you want to share. I would love to get to those. This is an opportunity for us to have a conversation. The mission of our organization, Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel against the rise of anti-Semitism. And for those of you who have been a part of PJTN, you know that we have been at the forefront focusing on this issue, producing award-winning documentary films and programs, our Focus on Israel show, that are aired all over the globe. We are now, with our 20th media partner this year, reaching 2.6 billion viewers. So we hope that you're tuning in, and if you're not, you can catch our Focus on Israel show. It's a weekly program on Daystar TV, and it airs every Sunday night at 9 or 11 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. Pacific Time. So we hope that you'll tune in, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Send us an email at comments@pjtn.org. So tonight our focus tonight is going to be on a couple of trips that I made this week, actually. One to Newton, Massachusetts, where parents and citizens gathered together to host a rally to let their school board and their superintendent know that they are not going to tolerate the indoctrination of our children. And I'm also going to talk about our recent screening of Boycott This at Florida Atlantic University, which leads me to South Florida. Florida Atlantic University is located in Boca Raton, and those of you who are tuning in tonight have heard the deeply saddening news of the shooting in the high school there, and it's in northwestern Broward County. Broward County is the county that I went to school in, and it's very sad to hear that this tragic event. We now know that there are 17 children, and I believe there's at least a teacher involved in the murder by this student, and a former student actually, who graduated last year. And as all the details are coming out, I am calling on all of our PJTN watchmen around the world to please join us in prayer for the students that were injured and that are in hospitals being treated, as well as for the families who have lost loved ones. It's going to take a long time to rebuild this community and to come back, but the community will. But they need our prayers. So I hope that you'll join me in doing that as we learn more about this tragic event. But as we were in Newton, Massachusetts, I was impressed with the parents and the citizens who showed up on Monday night for this rally. And of course, I was invited to come and be a speaker, one of the keynote speakers at the rally, with a local radio talk show host. We did a radio interview in the local community. And as you know, media is the most important tool that we can use to get our message out. Yes, we don't have the support of the mainstream media, but we use alternative. And we do have conservative media. We also have Christian media to get our message out. So I do want to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about a couple of issues that have come up in the news today. One of the stories actually that broke earlier this week is a top DNC, or Democrat National Committee official, dined with Louis Farrakhan and the Iranian president back in 2013. And this is now breaking news. Keith Ellison, who is a congressman, he's the deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee. He was invited by President Rouhani after a speech at the United Nations to have dinner with him. And as well as other leaders, he also dined with not just the Iranian leader, but Louis Farrakhan, who is an avowed anti-Semite. This man has called Jews satanic, and he's known for his position, and the fact that we have congressmen and members of the DNC and the Black Caucus who actually attended this event is outrageous that this is going on. And unfortunately, there is little news, and apparently this is news that is just recently broke, but there is little coverage of this issue in the mainstream media. And why should we not be surprised? Fox News did a story, and they've been running with it, so hopefully it'll get some more traction and more people to talk about it. But these individuals who are congressmen who have sworn to take an oath to protect our country, the United States of America, to dine with the leader of a country, a terrorist country that we call a terrorist country, and that we do not have strong diplomatic ties with any longer because of their threat, not just to U.S. interests, but also to our friend and ally in the Middle East, Israel as well. It's an outrageous thing, and I think we all should be contacting our legislators in Washington, D.C., and demanding that there be a full and thorough investigation into the relationships with these individuals in Congress, the members of the Black Caucus, Keith Ellison, the deputy chair of the DNC. This needs to be investigated because we also know that recently we, the American people, and our tax dollars were given to, in cash, were flown over by the previous president to fund Iran. If Iran would sign the deal, we would pay them off with billions of dollars. And of course, you know, we're still waiting to find out what the details were surrounding that whole issue. But I want to encourage you to email, call your elected officials in Washington, D.C., and demand that Congress investigate the activity and the relationship between these individuals, because, you know, one has to wonder if they're rubbing elbows and being entertained by these individuals who do not have the best interests of the United States at heart. What else are they discussing and negotiating? And I say that with all sincerity. We cannot trust individuals who are working, aiding, and abetting our own enemy, like Iran. So again, I want to encourage you to contact your elected officials. The other issue that's breaking right now is in Tennessee. Many of you know the Senator Bob Corker, who has said that he was stated last year that he was going to step down. He was going to retire from his Senate seat. And now rumor has it that Little Bob, as Donald Trump, President Trump has called him, has decided he's looking forward to considering running. He thinks that the country still needs him. Well, I want to just mention to all of you, back, I think it was 2013, when he was the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I requested a meeting on behalf of PJTN, but also on behalf of the over 600 pastors that PJTN represents here in Tennessee. And I met with his foreign relations staff to ask him, what is his policy in the Middle East? This was before ISIS took off. And why were we funding a terrorist group instead of funding Christians in Syria who had repeatedly contacted our government asking for military aid in order to fight Assad? And instead of giving the money to the Christians to let them fight and defend themselves, they gave it to a terrorist group, and who mushroomed into who ISIS is. And when I met with the foreign relations staff, I said to them, I'm coming on behalf of these pastors and our organization. We want to know what the senator is going to do about this issue. Well, the only response that I got to it was that Bibi Netanyahu supported this. And of course, my response to their team was, the Prime Minister of Israel is not sitting in on this meeting, so he couldn't tell us what he supported and what he didn't support. But we know now the outcome, the result. There are Christians, hundreds of thousands of Christians, who have been murdered in Syria. They have been forced out of their country They've had to flee the persecution, and it still goes on today. So I think it's interesting that Senator Corker, and I hope for those of you who are watching from Tennessee, if Senator Corker does decide to run, I hope that you will remember these things. We as an organization can't tell people who to vote for, but we ask you to not forget their policies that put people, innocent individuals, Christians, in jeopardy, their lives in jeopardy, and that of their children. And it's horrific what has gone over there. And of course, I also want to just encourage you all. This past week, we know that there was an Israeli jet that was shot down, and the two pilots that were flying that jet are recuperating in a hospital. And so I ask you to pray for them, pray for their complete and full recovery. This whole area is starting to escalate. The antagonism, the violence is starting to escalate in this area, and it is believed that Iran, our buddies, are instigating these attacks against Israel. So again, we need to be praying as Christians. It is our responsibility to stand with Israel, to pray for them, to pray for wisdom and strategy for the leadership. I also just want to mention too, there was for some of you who might be wondering, and I don't typically comment on Israeli politics, but I have received several requests from media asking me my thoughts about the Prime Minister and the alleged crime that he's taken bribes or he's taken gifts, and that he's violated laws. And I want to just remind you all, again, we need to be praying. I'm not taking a position, but what I will say is when I heard about this, that Bibi Netanyahu was indicted, his wife was indicted last year. They accused her of all types of illegal activity as well. So we do know that, like President Trump, there is a group within both of our countries that are trying to destroy and take down these two leaders because they don't agree with them. They don't agree with their policy. And we have to remember, in the Bible, God's word says that he raises up kings and he brings them down. And God lifted up, he raised up these two men, the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, and President Donald Trump at this hour for such a time as this. And so again, we need to wait and see before we jump to judgment, because trust me, the Prime Minister of Israel is dealing with these issues just as President Trump is as well. So again, a matter for prayer. I want to go ahead and move into updating you on our campaign to expose the indoctrination of our children in our textbooks. And that's really what we're going to talk about this evening. And again, I want to remind you, you can go, if you're watching us for the first time on PJTN Online on Facebook, I want to encourage you to go to our website at pjtn.org, sign up to get on our mailing list. We're also looking for PJTN Watchmen, to enlist PJTN Watchmen to become a monthly partner with us so that we can take our programs to our 2.6 billion viewers through all of our 20 media partners, so that we can educate Christians around the globe to stand against anti-Semitism. And when you see the evidence of the people, the grassroots, and years ago when I started this, and I remember, in fact, I've told this story before, and I met this gentleman who is retired military, Lieutenant Colonel, who is an advisor to the Joint Chiefs at the Pentagon. When I was in Newton, Massachusetts, several years ago, I was speaking to a Christian group as well as a Jewish group, and we were talking about this issue about the textbooks and the problem. What we were seeing, the content that was not just anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, but it was anti-American, anti-West, pro-Islamic. And in fact, so much pro-Islamic that it violates our U.S. and our state constitutions, because the content of what we're teaching our children through the textbooks, the instructional materials, the online websites that the teachers go to in order to download information, we're inciting this violence, this anti-Semitism, this anti-Semitic attitude, and this anti-American attitude within our children. But when I was there a couple of years ago talking about what happened here in Tennessee when we initiated this battle and we launched a nationwide campaign, this retired lieutenant colonel contacted me and he said, I can't be there tonight with you. However, I want to encourage you that every group that you speak to, every community that you speak to, parents, tax-paying citizens, tell them that the strategy that PJTN has put together is the way to win. This is how we will succeed in taking back local control. And the strategy really isn't a strategy that I came up with, because God gave that strategy to the prophet Nehemiah. We all know the story of Ezra and Nehemiah when they were given the authority to go back and to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And when Nehemiah went back to assess the damage, he went to the leaders of districts in front of sections of the wall, and he went to people who lived in front of other sections of the wall, and he convinced everyone, just rebuild your section. And as I was praying about this example, because Nehemiah had the people laying bricks to rebuild the wall with one hand, and if you go back and read the account, they had a sword in the other, which stated that Nehemiah knew that they were going to, in order to rebuild, they were also going to have to fight. This is a battle. We're not using swords to fight. Now we're using our Constitution, our republic, if you will, and the freedoms that we have in order to fight this battle, to challenge the leadership, the status quo of what's going on. But the significant thing about that story with Nehemiah is that they were able to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in 52 days, record time. And we can do that too. But it takes those of us, citizens, parents, who know the threat that we are facing, that our children have to endure, and the propaganda, because a lot of parents don't even know that this is going on. It's why we see, in elementary school. In fact, there was an elementary school in Newton, Massachusetts, where on the bathroom walls there was carvings of swastikas, and elementary children using words like F the Jews, carving it on the walls in the bathrooms. Where do these kids get this? And I was talking to one of the citizens, and they said, well, maybe it's coming from the parents. And I said, that could be so. I don't think most parents, though, in the United States would hold to those values. And I say that because if we look at the evidence of the citizens, the polls that are constantly taken on during election years, especially with regards to support for Israel, 70% of Americans support Israel over the Palestinians. So it can't be parents that are teaching this. Where are these children getting this information? I believe it's directly coming from the curriculum, from the textbooks. And I go back to the story of Nehemiah when this lieutenant colonel said to me, he said, that is the strategy. That's how we will win, because the enemy will not take us on a battlefield because they know they can't win against the United States military. But where they can win is in the field, on the field of ideas, and using curriculum in order to do that. And when you look at the curriculum, you look at the people who fund the curriculum, who the shareholders, the stockholders are. For example, Pearson Publishers. Some of you who are tuned in know that when we fought this battle in Williamson County, Tennessee, and really statewide throughout the state, we took on Pearson Publishers because Pearson is the largest textbook publishing company in our country. They provide the majority of the textbooks and instructional materials. They're the ones behind Common Core. And of course, if you control, and we were told through Common Core, if you control the standards and then you control the test, you ultimately will control the content in the textbooks, because no school district or no teacher will use a textbook that isn't going to help that teacher successfully teach the content, the standards that are required by that teacher to her students in their textbooks or in their school districts. So I actually, when we were in Newton, Massachusetts Monday night, I actually ran into that gentleman. He actually came to the rally, and little did I know it was him when I shared with him this story, the same story I just shared with you. And he said, well, that sounds like something that I would say. Well, come to find out, it was actually him. So it was encouraging to see that even former military, we had parents, there are teachers that showed up, teachers that wanted to remain anonymous. Of course, they were covered up, and they asked me not to use their name. But one teacher in the Newton, Massachusetts School District who is horrified at what's happening to the children, at the content that is being taught. And some people, I've heard, the naysayers who say, oh, the textbooks can't be that bad, we haven't seen any evidence of that. And in fact, when I did, an interview with one of the local talk show hosts, he said to me, I can't believe that teachers would knowingly do this and use content that is contrary to America, that is historically inaccurate, biased, and doesn't reflect the values of the community. And I reminded him that it's the older teachers that oppose this, because they see the change in the curriculum. They've been teaching for a long time, and they're the ones that are speaking out. It's the younger teachers that are being educated in the universities, and we know what's being taught to our children on the university campuses. And of course, we know also that the education universities and the future teachers of our future generations are being indoctrinated with the same propaganda. So when they go into the school setting and they see the curriculum and the standards that have to be taught that have been adopted within their state schools, this is not unfamiliar to them. And when a parent, that is older comes to them and starts questioning the content, they look at us like, what are you talking about? So many of you, those of you who are watching, many of you I've already heard from, and I've heard some of the comments that you've made in making your children bring their textbooks home as you review them with them, and you're finding the same type of content. And, as we launched the campaign in Tennessee, when we found that anti-Semitic quote that legitimized Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions, as we continued to dig into that textbook, and we found that quote, and not just that one, but found anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-Israel, pro-Islamic content in the textbooks. The parents in this state rose up. They rallied together, and we were able to make some advances. And of course, in Newton, they've been fighting this battle for a long time too, since 2011. So it is a grassroots effort, and the only way that we're going to win is if citizens and parents like you and I take back control of our community. When we were at the rally in Newton, Massachusetts, I will tell you that there was over 500 people in attendance. In fact, I was shocked when I pulled up, because when I attend rallies, even here in Tennessee, initially we packed one of the school board rooms in Williamson County with parents and citizens who were outraged once we informed the community of what their children were being taught. But to see that many people show up, and it happened to be a very cold night. It was, I think, 30 degrees when we were standing out there. People had their flashlights. They came all bundled up. They were prepared. They were serving hot chocolate and donuts and cookies for everybody who decided to come out. But to see this many people engage and make placards letting their school district know that they are not going to tolerate the indoctrinating of their children. This is our future, ladies and gentlemen, the future of the United States of America, the future of our constitutional republic hangs in the balance. Because if we continue on the course that we are, where 32% of our children, of the millennials, voted for an avowed socialist to be the president of the United States, how does that happen? But that our children were prepared and indoctrinated ahead of time. And it didn't just happen in college. It goes all the way back to the schoolyard, to elementary, middle, and high schools. And if we are going to save this country, it's going to be through the next generation. And that's why your support is so important. That's why becoming a PJTN Watchman is so important. And I want to encourage you again, we need 5,000 $20 a month PJTN Watchmen to help us every month to be able to get this message out, to be able to travel to communities like Newton and like South Florida and North Carolina and Ohio and Colorado, and continue our battle here even in Tennessee and in Texas, all over this country. We need your financial support. I cannot do this apart from you. But then after you commit financially, then we need you to help. We need you to sign up, to go to attend the school board meetings in your local district, because people ask me all the time, it's too big. The problem is too great, but it's not. If we bind together as a community and commit to ourselves, to one another, that we will fight this battle together. We will stand. Because one of the things that that deeply saddens me is that there were people, men and some women, who gave their lives, spilled their blood on foreign soil to protect our constitutional republic. They were willing to die. What is our generation willing to do? Too often I hear people say, I don't have time, I'm too tired, I've got too much on my plate. How can we not be involved? What we do in our generation, what we do today, will affect our children and our children's children and our children's children's children, future generations, if we don't stand up, because there is a generation who doesn't know, who wasn't educated the way you and I were. When I did the interview in Newton with the local talk show host, he made a comment when I talked about the avowed, that 32% of our millennials voted for an avowed socialist. He said, well, wait a minute. I don't have a problem with our kids being informed. And if they want to support a socialist, I said, and then he brought up Donald Trump. And I said to him, I said, Donald Trump, I said, let's talk capitalism. Let's talk about our constitutional republic. Why do we bring Donald Trump into this? It's socialism versus our Constitution. And the two cannot live, they cannot coexist together. But this is the mentality of even people in our generation that are our age, that have been educated properly, that have a different perspective about history. And we can go back to the old textbooks and we can look at the content in the textbooks. But here is an adult who's one of my peers in the media, who thinks it's okay, that it shouldn't be a concern that we have young people supporting a socialist. Because if more young people support socialism, we will no longer have a constitutional republic. We will no longer enjoy the freedoms that we do as Americans. And unfortunately, there will be more persecution. People of faith will be targeted and marginalized. We've already seen it. We saw it in the last presidential election, the comments made about evangelical Christians. And I'm telling you, there's so much resentment against evangelical Christians who vote their conscience, who went and showed up and voted for Trump. Why? Because they saw the alternative. And there was no way that they were going to allow that to come into existence. There was no way these Christians were going to allow Hillary Clinton, who bailed on our guys in Benghazi. I think back to that event, that horrific event, and those men who repeatedly asked for aid, repeatedly asked for help, and Hillary Clinton rolled over and went back to sleep. We do not desert our guys and gals on the battlefield. We bring in all the assets that they need to equip them so they can fight and defeat the enemy. And our guys had to fight for their very lives, and many lost theirs because of her. No, Christians are going to vote their conscience, and they did show up for Donald Trump. And God willing, we need to pray for that man to rebuild and take this nation back to where it was. But we have limited time, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 2.5, 3 years to change the trajectory of our country. And we have to do it with our children, their textbooks, the schools, the curriculum. We have to be paying attention to what our children are being taught. And if we don't speak up, if we don't do the research and show the difference, you know, there are 2 examples that I always give. Actually 3. One of the examples is the Barbary Pirates. Go to the section of your children's history textbook, look in the index in the back, find where it is, and read what the new textbooks say today about the Barbary Pirates. There was a textbook printed back in 1979. That's the oldest one I have. And so if any of you are watching this program today and you have history, geography, or social studies textbooks that were copywritten before 1980, because that's when the change really started to come in. That's when we started seeing the difference, slowly but surely. But if you have old textbooks, high school textbooks that you've kept, I would be grateful if you would consider sharing those textbooks with me. I have one that was copywritten back in 1979, and if you look at the section about Barbary Pirates, in that textbook, they talk about who the Barbary Pirates were. That it was because of the Barbary Pirates that we have our Marines. From the shores of Montezuma to the hills of Montezuma, from the hills of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. This is where our Marines came from, because these Mohammedans or Muslims were capturing our merchant marine vessels. They were taking our merchant marines captive. It was costing the United States of America money. John Adams went before Congress and Thomas Jefferson and said, we have to stop paying this tax because we cannot afford to keep this up. And that's when the United States decided to fight. Years ago, former President Obama made the comment about the great contributions that the Islamic world has made to the United States of America. Yes, it did make a great contribution. It caused us to establish a fighting force that is feared around the world, the U.S. Marines, a U.S. Marine. But I share that with you because that is just one example of the content. If you look at the new textbooks, they don't tell you that they were Muslims. They don't even mention that they were Mohammedans. And when they leave that important part of history out, our children don't know that we do have a long history with Islam, and it wasn't a positive one. The other example I use is about the Holocaust. If we look at the content, and in fact I have a teacher that I work with, a history teacher here in Tennessee, who is outraged. She teaches AP courses, AP history, She's outraged at the lack of information she is allowed to teach to the kids. There's barely any time to teach the Holocaust anymore because the standards are such that she is limited because she has so much information that she has to teach. And if she doesn't get that information to the kids and the kids don't test well in her class, then her job and her career is in jeopardy. She could be fired because she didn't meet the standards. And so now she's limited and she tries everything that she possibly can to try to every year deal with this. But years ago, when I was in school, we would spend a week on the Holocaust. We would go to museums, or a Holocaust survivor would come and speak to the class. But our Holocaust survivors are passing away. We don't have their stories to tell us, live stories to tell our children of the horrific events. And we're definitely not teaching about those events to any degree like we used to in our public schools here in the United States of America. So I remind people to do that and then go to the section in their textbooks with comparative religions. I can't even believe that I'm saying that there's a section in their history textbooks that teaches comparative religions, because that used to be reserved for college. But now we're teaching it to our children in high school. And if you look at the content, you can see that in the one Pearson textbook that we had, there were only 13 pages dedicated to Christianity. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, Christianity is still the largest religion around the world. And Christianity is relegated to 13 pages in our children's textbooks. Judaism is given 17 pages in the textbook. But when you come to Islam, Islam is given 37 pages. There is an obvious discrepancy. We had one 7th grade textbook that had a supplemental resource that appeared to have been published by the Council on American Islamic Relations. And you probably all know who CARE is. They were listed as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorist fundraising operation in the history of the United States of America. So I ask you, how did CARE get to influence our children in their textbooks or in their instructional materials, teaching our children about the 5 pillars of Islam? You know, years ago when I was studying, when religion came up in my studies in high school, it was only in the context of the country that we were studying. We never studied the religion and the tenets of the faith. Indonesia, I always go back to Indonesia because Indonesia was a Catholic, predominantly Catholic and Muslim country. But my teachers weren't teaching me how to pray the rosary beads because Catholicism was one of the main religions in Indonesia, and they certainly weren't teaching me how to make prayer rugs. But this is the content that is being taught to our children now. I had a parent who sent me a spelling list for her daughter who is in 3rd grade. One of her spelling words was the word shahada. Why? Why the word shahada in a 3rd grader's spelling list? What does shahada or Islam have to do with America? And why are we teaching, incorporating those words, Islamic words, in our children's spelling lists in 3rd grade? This is how troubling this is. And unfortunately, we had, when I was in Newton, Massachusetts, I had parents who were actually, who gave me a list, gave me a stack of copies of information that they had copied from the textbook. So we are going to, PJTN is going to be working with Newton, Massachusetts to help them mobilize their community. So I want to just take a minute and see if there's any, Pamela, thank you. I just want to see if there's any comments, and if anybody has any questions, or if you have an example, if you have asked your children or grandchildren to bring their textbooks home, to review them, to see the type of content that is in those textbooks, I want to hear from you. Again, you can send us a comment tonight, or you can email me at comments@pjtn.org. This one woman who came up to me, she of course wants to remain anonymous because her daughter is in the school system in Newton, Massachusetts, and she said, "We are deeply troubled." And unfortunately, a lot of people feel like, what can they do? Because they're coming up against a superintendent who doesn't see the problem, and of course the school board members who support the superintendent and his decision to keep this type of content in the schools. Well, a lot of it comes as a result of Common Core. And for those of you who've been following Common Core, 37 states adopted Common Core. The federal government, of course, Department of Education, dangled the carrot, and many of the states accepted the carrot and the money that went along with it and implemented Common Core, which is a set of standards. We've been told as parents they're about higher standards, which is not true. The standards, the only standards that Common Core is reinforcing, is indoctrinating our children with anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian, and anti-Israel, anti-Semitic rhetoric. And they are indoctrinating our children to the religion of Islam. Again, ladies and gentlemen, it violates the Constitution, the U.S. and our state constitutions, because the content clearly favors the establishment of one religion over all others. So please, Pamela's there saying you're so right. Thank you, Pamela, for being on with us tonight and for your comments. Let me just check and see if there's any more questions before we move on. But no, this is an important issue that we have to address. So again, contact us at comments@pjtn.org or send me a note tonight and let me know what you found in your children's textbooks. And if you are calling from a school district and you want to get involved in your community and make a difference in reviewing textbooks or reviewing the standards in your state, we would be more than honored to help you. That's what we're here for. We can't come fight the battle, just like I told the leaders that I met with in Newton, Massachusetts. I can't come to Newton, Massachusetts and fight the battle for them, but I can equip them. I can share with them the strategies that we put in place in order to succeed. And in Williamson County, when they would not remove the textbook that was anti-Semitic, we let our school board members know. It was an election year, but we let them know, put them on notice, that if you don't remove these textbooks, we will remove you from office. And we did. So there is hope. We can do it. It's a long war. There are short wars and there are long wars. And taking back control, local control of our children's education is the long war. But it's the war worth fighting for, because we're fighting to preserve the God-given Judeo-Christian country and Constitution, the Constitutional Republic, the United States of America. So I just want to encourage you about that. But I want to move on to, let me just refresh to make sure there's no new comments that have popped up. We also, after leaving Newton, Massachusetts, we flew down to Boca Raton, and we had a screening of our Boycott This documentary on the campus of Florida Atlantic University. And for those of you who've been following the BDS movement and the anti-Semitic incidents that have been occurring on our college campuses, Florida Atlantic University used to be a hotbed of anti-Semitic hatred. It was a university where they had what appeared to be babies swaddled up in white cloths with blood splattered on them. There were also Nazi swastikas that were spray painted on the mailboxes of some of the Jewish students that were members of the school or attending the school. And so in fact, there was a group, I found out last night that the Students for Justice in Palestine group was actually, their status as a club was revoked by the administration, because they found that one of the groups, their group, was actually supplying funding for terrorist activity. and they were inciting violence on the college campus. They were threatening students. They were constantly antagonistic, and so they were removed. They were shut down. And so we screened last night with a group of students, and the response from the students was outstanding. In fact, after the screening was over, the students, we all stood around for about 30, 40 minutes, and we had a conversation about the direction and the future of the country. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I was so impressed with these young people. It gave me hope. And I asked them, I said, you know, how have you turned out this way? I said, you know, people my age and other leaders of organizations that are fighting this battle on other college campuses, we don't, you know, all we see is the negative. We don't see the students like all of you. I said, you're such a breath of fresh air and encouragement to me. And I asked them, I said, how do you maintain that? And where does that come from? Were you taught this at home? And, you know, the interesting thing that I want to share with those of you, a lot of us have heard the narrative that our children, we send our kids off to college and they come back home and we don't know who they are. But one of the things that I found that was interesting about these kids is that they all said they came from a strong background, a strong family, a family that had Judeo-Christian principles. Whether Jewish or Christian, these kids had a strong sense of faith in their lives, and they found that when they first came onto the college campus, into that experience, they did feel like they were outnumbered. But the very things that they had been taught growing up by their parents they started to realize was actually true. They began to question, of course, in college because they heard a different narrative, but then they saw the same results of what they had been taught. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we sow into our children, there's another great scripture in the Bible that train up a child in a way that he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. And ladies and gentlemen, that is so true. I see it with my own children, in the choices that they've made in their lives and the commitments that they've made, and how they too are deeply concerned about the direction. And so too these students at Florida Atlantic University. It gave me great courage or great hope for the future for them. So if you have a student that's considering a college right now, I would encourage you that FAU is a great campus to send the kids. The community spoke up when there was problems on the campus. The administration heard and listened to the citizens and the parents of the students who were attending school there at FAU, and they resolved the conflict. And much like what Father McShane, we should be praying for Fordham University and Father McShane as they're fighting a battle. Students for Justice in Palestine, I believe, is the group that filed a lawsuit because Father McShane refused to give them club status on their college campus a year ago. In fact, it was January of 2017, and he refused to allow them to set up their club because they would not distance themselves from the group. So there are universities, administrations who are really seriously looking at what Students for Justice in Palestine and Muslim Student Association are doing. Here in Tennessee, we just introduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which basically is legislation that will adopt the U.S. State Department's definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism. It gives a foundation for the state legislature, for school districts, both secondary, elementary schools, and even higher ed schools. It gives them a basis as to what constitutes anti-Semitic behavior and what warrants an investigation, a federal investigation, to ensure that the civil rights of the Jewish students on the college campuses has not been violated. So we'll be updating you more and more on that as the days go on. So there's going to be more information forthcoming. I also have a comment from Jackie, I heard that Dr. Gina Luden wants to invite you to her radio show to talk textbooks. Oh, that's fabulous. So yes, if any of you have contacts with other media outlets or talk shows, radio talk shows, I would be more than happy to either come to the city or do an interview over the phone or even on camera with them to talk about these issues, because this is so important. The more Americans find out, we look at the threats as America, as Americans, and we ask ourselves, what can we do about it? Well, it starts with us, and it takes one person, just one parent, to speak up and to raise awareness about what's going on. So we want to help you come to your community. I'm going to see if we've got any more comments with regards to campus activity going on. And we have these problems. Oh, we have a comment about textbooks. These problems, textbooks, and problems on campus all begin with seeds grown at home. Yes, we need better parenting and God brought back into the equation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in 1962, when they removed prayer from our schools, it has been a slow deterioration. We have no respect for anything anymore. We have no respect for our flag. And don't even get me started, because this doesn't have anything to do with anti-Semitism, but when you see NFL athletes taking a knee to dishonor not just our flag, but our soldiers and our men in blue, this is basically, these NFL players are legitimizing this false narrative that the cops that are men in blue who take an oath to protect our communities from criminals, to accuse them of wanting to target blacks and kill them is outrageous. And that's what these people are actually saying. When they take a knee, they're in agreement that the police officers just want to kill black kids. That's not true. And everywhere I go, we always have police. I always recognize our veterans. I thank them for their sacrifice. I apologize for my generation squandering what their comrades, their friends who died, who gave their lives for our freedoms, that we have squandered the sacrifice that they have made. We're not going to be called to a battlefield to fight, but this is our battlefield, the battlefield of public opinion, the battlefield to make sure that we elect and appoint leaders in places of government, just like it says in the Bible, that these people have to not be willing to take bribes. Look at how many politicians, I was just reading in Exodus chapter 18 about the qualifications for a leader, and that leaders were supposed to lead people of 50s and hundreds and thousands, and they were supposed to be God-fearing. They were supposed to, not be corrupt. And look at how corrupt the political system has become. We don't have those godly leaders anymore. And it's because of the moral decay in our culture, in our country. But I believe that people like myself and like you are waking up and saying, we can't allow this to continue this way. And so people are getting involved, and they are taking a stand. And just like in Newton, Massachusetts, just like those students on FAU's campus, I encouraged every one of them before I left last night. And I told them that they have a destiny, that God, that they didn't just show up to that screening last night because they thought it would be fun or a good thing, although that was probably one of the impetus to get them there. But their being there and their interest in the issue of boycotting and sanctioning Israel, that was ingrained in them. And that's why they were drawn to that program, and that's why they showed up. And that's why we had a very frank discussion afterwards to talk about the direction of our country. And I reminded them that they came into the world, God created them just like He did you and I, and brought them into the world for such a time as this, and that He's equipping each one of them. He's already given them the very gifts that He wanted them to have in order to utilize those gifts for their divine appointment their divine destiny that only they can fulfill. It's for them. And it was so inspiring to see the encouragement, encouraging them and inspiring them, and to see the response. You know, it was just so precious because they were eating that up. They wanted to feel like their life means something, that they're not just here randomly. And I think too often, ladies and gentlemen, that's how our children feel. You know, they're in college, they're going through high school, or they're young adults, and they wonder, you know, what's going to come of my life? Why am I here? What is my purpose? We all face that. We all had those moments growing up when we wanted to know, what is my destiny? And I encourage those kids that the path that they've already embarked on is a testimony to the leadership skills that God is already preparing in them. And so for those of you who are parents, remind your children, encourage them, and remind them how important they are, that God thought of them, brought them into the world for such a time as this, and He wants to develop in them the leadership, the character, in order to lead, to take this nation back. Our country is a Judeo-Christian country. I don't care what anybody says. Yes, we've made mistakes. We've pulled God out of our schools. We don't pray. We don't let them pray anymore, although we'll let them make prayer rugs for Islam. But these kids, they need to know that there is hope, and they need to be encouraged. And we need to remind our children that they do have an important destiny. I'm going to just check see if we have any more comments. And I stand corrected, this is episode 8. So for those of you who've been tuning in, we have another comment. Love Focus on Israel program. Watching on Daystar. Keep the meaningful content coming. Thank you so much. Yes, Focus on Israel is one of our favorite programs to produce as well. In fact, we have had more responses from around the world. We had a gentleman from Africa who recently emailed me about the program. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, Daystar is airing the Focus on Israel show Sunday evenings, 11 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. Pacific Time. And then if you don't catch it on Sunday night on Daystar, you can always tune in to God TV on Monday evenings and watch it there. And so set your DVR if you're not home. And again, we would love to hear from you. We've got a couple more minutes. I just want to see if there's any more questions, comments. How can we invite you to our school district to speak? Great question. I would love to come and speak to your community. So if you would just email us at comments@pjtn.org, let us know what school district you live in, what state, what city your school district is in, and we would be happy to work on putting a meeting together to come and speak to your community and mobilize them to action. I just got back from Newton, Massachusetts. Like I said, we had a great meeting with the leadership, and we're going to start working with them to help them gain some more traction, add some more parents and citizens to their roles to inform the citizens about the content that is being taught to their children. I want to, let me see if there's anything else in my notes before we wrap it up, because we're down to, I've got a quote, an inspirational quote for the day, and it has to do with education. Imagine that. And this is the quote. It says, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." That was said by none other than Martin Luther King Jr. What wisdom that man had. And so I want to, again, just wrap up the program this evening. I want to thank you again for joining us. Tune in next week. We'll be here, and we look forward to hearing from you. Again, go to pjtn.org, sign up to become a monthly PJTN Watchman, just $20 a month, and you can help us get this message out to more Christians around the globe. 2.6 billion. That's a lot. So God bless you. Thank you so much for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and the state of Israel. We'll see you next week on PJTN Online.